And I'm going to invite Ann Bird, who is the president and partner of CTQ, to bring greetings before we get started.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am assuming it's afternoon for you all. We are delighted to have you here with us. And Doyle, just so thrilled to have you here to lead this, this webinar for us to focus on some very, very important work that's going on right now, where so many educators are coming to the support and service of your colleagues. And we at CTQ are delighted to be able to be the connector and the catalyst for some of this work that is happening right now. And I'm really looking forward to listening in to the webinar and learning some things. I always do when you guys who've been part of our network for so long are given the opportunity to share what you know and do. So thank you again, Doyle, for joining us to do this. And Lori, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ann. So I'd like to welcome everybody, share my screen here, to this e-workshop of how administrators can use virtual tools to support teachers and their virtual learning. When all of the craziness occurred, our first reaction at CTQ was to let's connect with real practicing educators to find out what they need, what challenges and successes they're having. And from that initial meeting, which we had a hunch about, we just moved to this, okay, let's connect with real educators and put their voices in the room and find out what their real experiences are and provide opportunities for real educators to share real experiences with real students from real schools. And so that's where this webinar series originated and how it came to be. So everybody who is sharing in the series is dealing with this, with the realities of what's going on in schools today. Like Doyle is sitting in his school today. So just a little bit about CTQ. Our tagline, if you will, is inform, inspire, and innovate. And we inform based on research and the real and the lived experiences of practicing educators. We use that research and those lived experiences to inspire the field to think about and see examples of what a redesigned system that better serves all students might look like. And then we work with partners, be those schools, districts, state agencies, other organizations, unions, for the folks who are ready to take on the hard work of really rethinking what a redesigned system would look like that, like I said, that better serves all of our students. And so in the inspire and innovate field, I'm gonna switch to introducing Doyle, who is the principal, as you can see, of Davie County High School. Again, the key point here and the purpose of these webinars is for real educators to share their experiences, and for those of you in the room also to not only take away information, but also contribute to the conversation and share with each other. So without any further ado, I'm gonna pass this over to Doyle so that he can share what's working for him, and you can help him solve some of his challenges also with what's working for you. Doyle.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Ann. I'm excited to be here. Just to give you a little background about myself, I was a high school math teacher for 20 years before moving into the world of administration. I started my administrative work here at Davie County High School as an assistant principal for 2.5 years before being named principal here. So I've been here as principal for 6 years, 8 years total in administration. I would love to, in the chat box, I would love to get an idea of who's in the room. So if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat box what your title is and what your current role is in schools. And while you are doing that, I will also talk a little bit about my connection to CTQ. It started early on. After I received my national board certification in 2004, I remember getting this random survey from CTQ. Didn't really know what it was about, but it was about teacher leadership. So I completed it And then a few months later, got a call about wanting me to see if I was interested in doing some work with CTQ. We began our work with beginning teachers and doing some virtual coaching with beginning teachers, and then moved that work to national board candidates the following year. After doing that for a couple of years, I started working with CTQ on facilitating some voice sessions, which were basic. That meant virtual organizers inspiring communities of educators, and really worked with facilitating and working with educators and teacher leaders to facilitate virtual learning communities and some strategies for doing that. After we did that for many years, we kind of reworked the curriculum and developed the Cultivating Communities for Impact curriculum, which again was still designed to facilitate some online learning, but also online communities, but also as well really work with teachers and kind of sharing their voice as well. And so then on our next slide, I've had the chance to really kind of experience, I think we've all had a chance now to experience our virtual learning communities as a dog park. If we go to the next slide, you can see some examples of some people that, or some characteristics you might have recognized working with maybe some teachers or some virtual groups that you're working with now. We've got that lurker who is kind of sitting there waiting to respond, kind of walking around the edges, kind of getting their feet wet, seeing what's going on, kind of in the background. Then we've got the aggressor, who's that first one to chime in and they can also take over a VLC. So that is, I've seen that happen occasionally. And then we've got the inappropriate sniffer, who might be making the inappropriate comments or is kind of getting everybody off track and not focused on what we're supposed to be doing. Followed by the social butterfly. I've got a few teachers that that social piece is very important to them. And so when we are meeting virtually, we have to balance that social aspect while at the same time trying to make sure that we are being productive in our VLCs. We got the barker, who was probably one of the first ones to shout out and make sure that their voice is being heard, whether it is right or wrong. And then we've got the clickster, who always hangs out with their little core group of people and doesn't really interact with others, but has that little group that they like to interact with. Then we got the gone missing I see that a lot with our students right now, our gone missings that we're chasing after, trying to find, and our teachers are doing a great job of actually trying to find those kids right now. But sometimes we have that with our VLCs as well. And then we also have the Please Be My Friend, who is looking for someone to snuggle up to. And then finally, we have everybody's best friend, who is kind of similar to the social butterfly, but is also trying to make sure they're keeping that temperature and that dog park friendly. So what I would like for you to do is if you go to the top of your screen, you have this view options menu, and down below it, there's an option to annotate. And it gives you many options there, but if you click on stamp, there's an option to do a check mark. And I just want you to check mark what your kind of natural tendency is when you join a virtual learning community. My natural style is actually a lurker. I grew up being very introverted, so I'm always the one that's kind of filling everybody out first and kind of looking around before I kind of make comments. So I'm waiting to see everybody else's comments before making mine. So I'm going to look here and see what everybody else is putting down. Lots of lurkers and aggressors. Got the social butterfly. Okay, good variety of responses. Do you notice some of these traits in some of the learning communities you're working with now? What I've noticed, one of the things I've noticed is some of my teachers who had certain traits face-to-face now have a different trait when I see them online. I have a social butterfly in one of my math PLCs, and she's really turned into a lurker. And it could be just the comfort of face-to-face versus the comfort of virtual. The virtual space is not something that they're very comfortable with. So they've kind of changed their personality in the learning community based on what method we're using now. I would love if there's someone who'd like to grab the mic to talk about either their style or some styles they're seeing in some of the learning communities we're seeing now that we are online.
I know for our school, interestingly, I think at least we're 6 through 12. At the high school level, personalities actually have not changed all that much. We expected a lot of people to kind of go missing because we have some people who don't love to play with technology, but they've actually stayed engaged and still don't love technology, but they're kind of just the same person. I expected more of a story like you were saying.
Thank you. Anybody else? And I'll say that one of the things that I have found valuable about this information is it really helps me when I really try to let my teachers lead their learning communities, whether it's face-to-face or virtual. But when I sit in on those meetings and I know I have someone that has a certain tendency, then I try to put some things in place to help facilitate those things, so the social butterfly doesn't just take over and it becomes a social event versus an event that with a focused agenda. So that's hopefully something that as we go through this webinar as well, you'll get some ideas of things you can put in place to help facilitate these communities when you have these situations with a variety of personalities going on. All right, thanks for sharing. The next thing I want to talk about is this is something that I gave my staff when we first really moved into online learning. We had about 2 weeks to prepare. Our state closed for 2 weeks, and during that time, our teachers were preparing for online learning. So after they had, so this is one of the questions I asked them to complete for me when we kind of met by department before we went online with the new information. So I asked them to complete, use the same word for both blanks. If teachers were blank before, now they are really blank. So in the text box, just give me one word that would be used for both of those sentences. And as I'm reading through the comments, I love the variety of comments there. I see some very positive descriptive words being used, as well as some very factual descriptors being used. They are definitely stressed, and if they were stressed before, they're definitely stressed now. I do like some of those positive descriptors. Hopeful, creative was an awesome word that I saw in the chat box. Engaged is a great word as well. But this was something, when I actually shared this with teachers, I didn't use the word teachers, I used the word families when I did this, to give them a sense of understanding what we're getting ready to go to, that and they used a lot of the same descriptor words that you used in the chat box here. Some stress was a big word that was used over and over again. One of the positive descriptor words they used was engaged. If families were engaged before, now they're really engaged, and I've seen that with a lot of families. And we also, another word that we saw used a lot, if families were struggling before, now they are really struggling. So that was something that we used to really help our teachers understand that this is going to be different than what you're used to doing face-to-face. You're not going to be able to teach everything that you taught face-to-face in a virtual setting. So you really had to focus on what was the important things that you needed to talk about. So just kind of getting them a mindset that this is going to be a little different doing this remotely than versus doing it, having them in a classroom. And so the next thing that I also like to do when I'm working with students in a virtual environment, or faculty in a virtual environment, or even a face-to-face environment, is really get a sense of, when we're working as a team, it's important to know how we work together. So the one thing that I ask them to do, and if I'm face-to-face, I have them actually get in a room and we kind of physically spread out in these directions. But what I want you to do, very similar to what we did before, is I want you to go back to the view options and the annotate. And I want you to use the stamp again with the check mark and check what compass direction you are. Are you one of these people that's north, that's I like to get it done? Are you a west, which is focused on, I need the details? Are you a south, which means you're checking on the pulse of everybody? Is everybody good? You're really concerned about how everybody's doing in the group. And east needs the big picture. So just looking at this slide, you can see that we've got a good variety here of different styles when we're approaching a task. I will say I'm a West. I need the details. I think it comes from my math background. I'm very analytical, so I have to have lots and lots and lots of details before I feel like I can make a decision, which can be challenging in a role as an administrator because sometimes you have to make decisions very quickly, and that's when I find myself really wanting to kind of shut down. I joke saying, I've made too many decisions today, stop asking me questions, because I need those details, and decision-making really stresses me out. Anybody like to talk about, grab the mic and talk about their style and how that plays out in the way that they lead, whether it's as an instructional coach, as an administrator, or whatever role you're serving in right now.
So this is Katessa. I put myself in two categories. I just need the big picture, and then I want to be left alone and get the work done. I like to be creative. I don't like people telling me details that stifles my creativity. I like to be able to be creative to navigate and get the job done. So that's the kind of style that I am.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Okay, also on the screen, what I like you to do is when I think about these also, I also like to look at who is my complementary opposite. And it doesn't have to be your directional opposite. So for example, for me, I really need someone who is an East to complement my style, because I have an assistant principal who is an East, and he is very helpful because he sees a big picture and he comes to me with these big picture ideas. And of course, my first thought is these 30 questions I have for this grand idea that he has and thinking of all the details that need to be involved. But he helps push me out of my comfort zone of being a West, because sometimes I need to see the big picture and move in a direction that we are not currently in. So very similar with the tools we've been using with the annotate, use that stamp and use a star for what you would consider your complementary opposite. And if somebody, again, would like to grab the mic, I'm one of these people that loves to hear other people talk besides myself. So if you would grab the mic and share with me what your complementary opposite and how you find that style balances your natural tendency.
I find that I'm a West and I really appreciate Easts because I get caught in the weeds. And so I need somebody to kind of think bigger and what could be, because otherwise I just kind of get, I just get caught up.
I think we're very similar, Noah.
I'm kind of a middle between West North by default. So for me, I need people that are Souths that can keep me remind me of how are we affecting people here? How are we making sure that we're caring for people, not just plowing through getting our process taken care of.
Thank you, Tyler. One of the things I always remember, one of the first times that we ever did this activity with a group of teachers, we had them go into the four corners of the room, and I only had, it was about a group of about 20, and I had one South. But what I realized is when we did that, it made sense that we had one South, and just knowing her style, she was one that was always checking the temperature of everybody else in the room and making sure everybody was good. But it really gave us a sense of, okay, we got to make sure that we are considering everybody's style. And it really helped us kind of, as we were forming groups to get other things done, really gave us a style of, okay, of how to divide the work to really accomplish what we need to accomplish. So we didn't have, first of all, everybody that's the same style in the same group. So that was one of the things when we did this visually, really helped a lot when we did it in a face-to-face environment. And so then I kind of want to move on and talk a little bit about so how we can use some virtual tools and different types of virtual tools to help facilitate our teachers during this time when we don't have them face-to-face. And we really have two types of strategies for doing this. And we have synchronous tools and we have asynchronous tools. Right now we're in a synchronous environment because we are all together in one place and having a chance to communicate. So I wanted to give you some strategies of some things that are really helpful when we're trying to do some synchronous things and also some asynchronous things. So I'm gonna start with some synchronous strategies. And the first one is something that is very, very awkward to do in a virtual environment, but it is actually using wait time. And I think Lori had that slide up. So using virtual wait time is extremely awkward. You notice I've tried to use it a few times today, but you really need to embrace it. People need time to virtually take in what's being said, and they also need to have a chance to process. I notice when I observe teachers, wait time is something that is even awkward in a face-to-face environment. There's not a lot of time given in silence for students to answer, usually because on somebody's name they want an immediate response. So Don't be afraid of the virtual wait time. Look for opportunities to do that so that you give the people that are with you time to really think about what's going on and actually give a good response. The second thing that I put in here was to, that's the slide, yeah, is to, for strategic questioning. Look for opportunities to add questions to virtual meetings so that you avoid these one voice meetings. I sat in on a 3-hour virtual meeting the other day, and I think 2 people talked the whole time. So I lost focus within 20 minutes. So look for opportunities to add questions to your meeting so that you hear other voices. The chat box is a perfect way to do that. So right now, what I'd like for you to do is in the chat box, just share something positive you have experienced during this remote learning time, either from teachers or students. What is some positive experience you have taken away during this remote learning time so far?
What are you doing?
I'm in a class where he's practicing wait time.
Practicing wait time.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. And remember to unmute if you do want to speak. Very important.
Tyler, I was reading your comment about some of those reluctant people have been brought in a new format. What I've noticed is some of my people that haven't shined in the past are having a chance to shine now because they are more comfortable in this virtual environment. So they're supporting teachers that might be experienced teachers in the classroom that have been really struggling in the virtual format. So they've been really helping some of our experienced teachers with a new way of teaching. Cheryl, I like your comment as well about teachers connecting with students by doing some fun activities and using some virtual tools as well. Not only am I an educator, I'm also a parent of a 5th grader and a 7th grader. So I have been seeing them learning in a variety of different ways as well. Dana, I love the fact that you mentioned the new collaboration. That is one thing that I'm noticing as well from my staff is they are collaborating in a different way and even more so than they have in the past. Instead of some teachers being isolated, they are now definitely feeling the need to collaborate more. And I know Jessica added a question for you, Dana, in the chat box. Do you feel staff are taking things on in a deeper way or just different? Feel free to answer that in chat box, or if you want to, grab the mic and describe your experience as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me join in the conversation. I have noticed that some new collaboration has been able to occur, and that is like in the future, the CLD in our past, the CLDE teacher leader didn't always have a natural connection with someone like the dean. And in this format, she is, to give you a specific example, she's now creating sentence stems that teachers can use for their remote learning. With the CLD emphasis to encourage our kids to produce more language. And that collaboration wasn't occurring in the building. So new kinds of cool collaborations are occurring, I would say. And Jessica, I would say your question around deeper ways or just different, I would say it's probably a little bit of both. If they were ever afraid of technology, they sure are not anymore. So now they're all getting more enriched experience with bringing technology, of course. The different part is absolutely because like that example, there's new collaboration happening. There's things that we kind of took for granted in our regular school week that are now being more structured and collaborated because we're working virtually and remotely.
Thank you for sharing, Dana. That's awesome. And then the third strategy that I put that I listed when you're doing a synchronous situation is optimizing the chat box, which you have seen us doing here today as well. So I, by nature, am one that would prefer to, if I had my choice, rather use the chat box to communicate than to grab the mic. So using that chat box as an opportunity to gather a lot of opinions really helps, especially if you have that lurker in your virtual environment. They might be more willing to communicate through a chat box if they don't really want to grab the mic. So that is some strategies that I've seen before. The nice thing about the chat box is it does allow you to collect that information. So if you need to go back and look at it, if you're recording, you can go back and read that information. So I use the chat box a lot when I'm working with teachers or when teachers are in the VLC. So one of the things that you can go ahead and advance the slide, Dory. One of the things that I did with my staff right before, so after this 2-week period when we were preparing ourselves to go from a face-to-face situation to a remote learning situation, was I met with them by department and I wanted to get a feel of how they were doing right before we got started. So I just did a little temperature check with them. So going back to right before we moved into a virtual learning environment, going from face-to-face to virtual, just again, you can use the stamp icon again and stamp where you were on this timeline of I'm totally lost, don't want to do this, to I'm ready to go, let's do this. So just kind of where were you right before we moved into this new way of doing things? So I say we have a lot of 9s and 10s. That's awesome. I would say when I first started, I was probably at a 7 because I had used a lot of virtual tools before, but really knowing how I was going to do that with my specific staff and really the unknown for them was helpful. What I found with my staff, depending on my department, it was interesting. It really was by department. I would have a low of about 4 to a high of about 10. But it really gave me some indications on which groups needed more support, which ones did I need to help monitor and help facilitate more, as well as which ones I felt like, okay, we're good to go. And the ones that seemed to be on the higher end really had taken the collaboration piece to heart. And then I followed this up with a question in the chat box, which I'll ask you as well. At this point, what do you feel is one concern that you still have as we moved from face-to-face to virtual? So what's one concern that you're still having as we are doing this remote learning. No, I saw your question about how might we move from worksheets to performance assessments. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. That is one thing that we have been struggling with as I've been talking to my teachers of how do we do performance assessments that we feel are accurate of what they're learning. So I would love for you to grab the mic and tell us if you have any ideas or kind of what your thoughts were around that performance assessment piece.
I have no ideas. I wish I did. When I left the classroom this year, and I was a PBL practitioner, certified in PBL, firm believer in the idea of mastery learning or competency or performance assessment. And I wasn't getting a whole lot of traction when we were in the building. And now where I have teachers who are wanting to be more interdisciplinary because they see that the workload is easier if they do that, they still want to then go back and rely on worksheets. They want to go back and rely on easy to grade stuff, and instead of effectively using questioning and effectively using feedback, or even just engaging kids at a personal level with their work, with behavior specific feedback to increase learning.
I agree with that, and that's something that I'm seeing too. As I look at what's going on, we see a more of a traditional type module with teachers because it is easier than those PBL strategies that we've also been trying to adopt as well. There was something that Dana had mentioned about just worried about student engagement, and that was one of the biggest concerns that my teachers listed when we were doing what are some of your concerns going forward, and that still is something that we are still trying to deal with. My district is also very concerned about that. They actually have the principals send out a survey. I think we're doing it weekly now. Just trying to get a pulse from our teachers about how many of our students are not engaged, not connected, partially engaged, or fully engaged. So we collect that data and we give that to our district office. I also try to look at it to see, are there pockets? Are they engaged in our core classes and not engaged in the elective classes, and things like that. Also, I'm looking at grade levels. I teach high school. Our state has given us some guidance for graduation credits for seniors, and basically they were told that if they were passing as of March 13th, they can't not pass. So you can imagine when we try to share that information with students, but tell them they're not done, you can get the message that the students are hearing. They hear, I'm passing no matter what, so I'm going to be physically done whether you tell me I'm done or not. So that has been something that we have been trying to balance, telling our seniors, okay, if you're passing by March 13th, you're good to go, but we still want you to work because what you're doing is important to what you're going to do after high school. But that's some of the things that we've been monitoring is that student engagement a lot. And Lori has a good comment. Can students create videos for performance assessments? I know that's something that our performing arts department is doing a lot of, where they are creating videos to show that performance assessment piece. But how can we also then have teachers use that for a performance piece for something greater than just a worksheet? So also moving from a synchronous background to kind of an asynchronous background. The next question is something that something similar I did with my teachers in this year too, was I had them use Padlet. That way they could kind of respond in their own time. So we sent this out in an email, and we asked them a question, but the question I want to ask you is, share a strategy that you have used during remote learning that has worked well. So if you will go to the Padlet, we're going to put the link to the Padlet in the chat box.
Hey, Jessica, do you have that link or? Okay, I'll unshare. Give me just a second. Or Doyle, do you have it? Okay.
Put it in the chat box real quick.
Okay.
Oops, I lost my chat box. Where'd it go? Oh, here it is. All right, so I think I've put the link to the Padlet in the box. If you just copy it and paste it to a browser, it should take you to the Padlet, and you can click on the plus key, and then you can add your response. Share a strategy that has worked well for you during remote learning.
And Doyle, on my shared screen, are you seeing the new things being added?
Yes, I can see them.
Sometimes it doesn't keep up. Okay.
Danny, your question was that strategy overall or specific purpose? You can give me either one. I would like this information for myself on things that either teachers are using or things that teacher leaders or administrators are using to really help with this remote learning time. So I've seen some great things that teachers have done, but any strategy that you've seen that's worked well that you wouldn't mind sharing with someone else so that we would have those strategies to share with others. I've seen some great ideas. And one of the reasons I wanted you to put it in the Padlet is so that even after this session, you have this to go back to and refer to. Because one of the things I wanted for myself was some strategies that I could also share with either my admin team or with my teachers as well. One of the things that I really liked when I was just kind of looking through these real quickly is someone had put about the self-care piece and the connections and the small wins and celebrations. That is something that I was glad to see because I'm used to doing some celebrations and stuff as we were face to face. But to be honest, with this sudden move to remote learning, I've been so focused on the process that I've sometimes have forgotten to take a minute and check on my staff as far as making sure that we are doing celebrations and small wins. So I do a Monday memo every Sunday night. I send it out that kind of gives a summary of the week. And in those, we have like shout outs for students and shout outs for teachers. So one of the things I'm hoping to start doing is change that to a shout out for remote learning so we can celebrate the successes that we're seeing and also give some teachers some strategies that we're seeing being effective in certain situations. Because what I'm seeing right now is we're having conversations by department, but we're not having conversations whole faculty right now because of just the massiveness of our school. I really appreciate all of these great suggestions and strategies. I'm going to definitely put these in a kind of a toolkit to look into and to share with my teachers as well. And even after this session, if you think of other resources, please add them to this. I will leave this up so that we have this, and as long as you have that link, you've got it. But I would really love to come back to this a lot as well as a one-stop shop for some strategies that we can all use together. The next thing I want to talk about is just some lessons that I've kind of learned over the past few weeks. I am definitely not an expert at this. I'm learning as we go like you are. But here are some things that I've noticed that has been helpful as we've moved into this role as I've been supporting teachers. The first thing is that consistency in platforms among teachers is very helpful. We are a school that uses, we use the Google Suite, but we also use Canvas. So we had some teachers that were using Canvas before, and some teachers that were using Google Classroom before, and some teachers that weren't using anything. So what I encourage them, if you haven't been using one, we kind of suggested one to use, but from a student's end, it's really helpful to have that consistency instead of having to go to 2 or 3 different LMSs. If you just have 1 or 2 that they go to, that really helps. It also really helps, I've noticed, as a parent, to be able for a teacher to know what it looks like on the student side versus what it looks like from the teacher side. It took me a while as a parent looking at it from a student point of view to kind of figure out what they're seeing versus what I was used to seeing from an instructor side. So that's helpful in that consistency piece. As you've seen in some of the slides, try to take the temperature of the staff frequently and just to check on their well-being and how they're doing. So I do a lot of either asynchronous or synchronous checks with them through a Google form or through these little short activities we were doing here. It's important to keep track of how your staff is doing. I know I have ups and downs, and I know they do too. And so it's important to make sure that you're keeping track of how they're doing. Looking for multiple ways to communicate with students and parents. The engagement piece has been something that we've been stressing about and working on and making sure that we're making those contacts or trying to. I will say that my counselors have had a great success using Google Voice, which gives them a phone number that's not their own personal phone since they're working from home right now. And the nice thing that they are seeing is that they are responding to text because that's how students communicate. So these students that were hard to reach before, now that they have the Google Voice accounts and they're texting them, they're actually responding. So that was something that we saw, not just emails, don't just use emails or phone calls, but also if you can find a way to be creative in how you communicate, it's really helpful. One of the things we've been trying to do is develop 3 to 5 expectations of teachers during remote learning. This changes over time. So we had some basic expectations when we moved to it because this was new. So it was basic stuff like make sure you had office hours posted on your website or your Google Classroom or Canvas so that parents and students knew when you were available online. And there were just 2 or 3 other basic things that we want to make sure that the setup was right. And then now we're kind of moving into, okay, we want to make sure that there's at least 1 personal contact a week. And that could be like a Google Meet or a Zoom meeting so that there's an opportunity to meet face-to-face or develop a video that has you talking and on it so that the students have a personal connection. And then I see somebody mentioned, is there an issue with students misusing Google Voice with teachers? I don't think so. The way we're doing it is the teachers are the ones that are setting the Google Voice accounts up, and I think they're communicating with the kids' cell phone number that way, and that way we have a log of the communication through Google Voice as well. Develop a one-stop shop for digital resources. When we started this process, we got flooded with teachers being helpful, our own teachers being helpful, and as well as a bunch of other outside sources being helpful with different resources that we can use. And what we found was teachers didn't have a chance to, teachers were missing emails because they were being flooded with emails. So what we did was we set up a Google Classroom for our staff. And then I said, let's just put any resource in that classroom so that the teachers can then, when they have time, go into that classroom and find that resource versus having to dig through all these emails. So that was one thing that was really helpful because we were getting overwhelmed with resources and support, but I couldn't keep track of it myself. I know the teachers can keep track of it. I'm reading over Dana's chat. And we're doing a lot of those required office hours. Not that you have to be visible to kids during those 2 hours, but that they know that you're going to have an online presence during those 2 hours. So they know they can email you and get a response during those 2 hours. What I would love to do is I would love to hear from you. What other successes or what other questions or what things are you finding successful during this remote learning time? So I'd really like to hear from you about things that are working well and some strategies that we can take as we move on. Or are there any questions that you might have? Virtual norms are extremely important. Yes, that is something that we've set virtual norms. We set norms when we do PLCs anyway, but we have had to go back and revisit how do we do virtual norms because it does take on it's a different beast when we're doing virtually versus face-to-face.
I can add a couple more things. I think some of the things that we're now able to think about is like bringing PBIS back in. So this week, who knows what week, right? This week we integrated, and last week we integrated back to our RISE acronym, which is like our acronym for PBIS. And but we established like a matrix for kids that was about what that looks like on a virtual platform. So we're also starting to have conversations with them around that because there's just some things that I'm a preschool through 5th grade school leader. And so, the mics are on and families are walking behind them and they're not being appropriate with their siblings. And right. So all these things are happening, wrestling. And so we kind of talk to them about like having quiet space and private space and the privacy for their families. And then we made like a little bit of a matrix and talked to the kids around like, how do our RISE behaviors look virtually? And they really had a good job. They did a great job engaging in that. And the other thing we're trying with we're doing like a weekly Wednesday fun day. So it was like hat day. Then it was career and college readiness will be next week. So we're going to dress for your career. And Earth Day was this week. So we're just trying to like spruce it up a little bit and still have those PBIS type things occurring virtually. That's awesome. I think giving them focusing on them as people as well is very important. Like you're saying, giving them some sense of normalcy during this unnormal time, having those spirit days that you would normally have face-to-face, giving those opportunities is awesome. I know for me as a high school principal, the seniors have been on my mind constantly. Prom being in doubt, graduation, a face-to-face graduation being in doubt. How do I still help the seniors celebrate this being their senior year when there's so much confusion and uncertainty for them as to what the next couple months are going to look like? So it's been important for me to really kind of focus on what can we do to not make this such a horrible event for them. Anybody else want to share? Thank you so much for sharing, Dana. That's awesome.
Any other final questions? Well, if not, I just want to say thank you for being here today. I'm going to turn this back over to Lori in a second. I just feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or any concerns. Again, if you have any great ideas, please share them with me. I've been getting some ideas, but the more ideas that I have, I appreciate because I can't think of everything. So feel free to shoot me an email or a tweet, let me know some things that y'all are doing so that I can steal your ideas if I need to. So I'm going to turn this over to Lori.
Oh, and I just want to give a heartfelt thanks to Doyle for the terrific conversation and ideas that were shared here. Every single one of these, I learned so much. So thank you for making the time, space, and putting the effort into putting this together for us. And that thanks also goes to all of you who attended today. I know that everybody has at least 10,000 other things they could be doing or places they could be, and you chose to spend an hour with us. So thank you for that and for all you're doing for your students, your families, your community. We've seen that y'all are kind of holding things together when some folks are just holding on by very, very thin thread. So thank you for all you're doing, not only with all of this distance or virtual or online learning, whatever you call it, but being that fabric that holds folks together. You're so, so important, and just want to be sure that I extend thanks to all of you for doing that work. And if there are any ways that we at CTQ can be helpful to you, please don't hesitate to reach out on social media, on our website, to my email is there. We'd be more than happy to try to put something together to help support your work. I know Jessica and I will, at least Jessica and I and possibly Doyle will stay on for as long as you want if you have individual questions. Otherwise, we will bid you adieu with grateful thanks and hope you have a terrific evening. I'm sorry, one more thing. There are a number of additional workshops coming up available on the same page where you registered, and then I put this in the chat box, but later this afternoon or evening, these slides and the recording link will be available to you in case you want to share it with some of your colleagues. All right, thank you so much, and everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.